How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. What the fuck is going on in the universe for August 12th through August 19th of 2019? Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing and continually supporting me. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'm so excited you can be here this week because we've got a lot to go over this week. There's a lot going on. This is that point of August where you start to see the ball rolling a little bit more. We get out of that June and July gloom that we had and get to actually start embracing this Leo season a little bit more, I don't want to say authentically, but you know, when you're like at a party and you should be enjoying it and you're not, and then you finally get to that point where you can just let go and actually enjoy things and actually start to move forward a little bit and be in the moment. That's kind of like what this week is like. You know, we did just have Jupiter station direct on Sunday, so, you know, as we were starting to end last week, going into this week, you might have already felt to be good, felt more positive going into this week, feeling a little bit more refreshed, feeling a little bit more excited and, you know, opportunistic, or I should say optimistic about things. And so with this week, we have a lot of highlights, and I think that this is really going to pump up that Jupiter stationing direct, and I think that this is really the week where shit gets started, and we get, you know, I don't know what else to say besides shit gets started, and we feel a lot better just to sum it up. But this week, we have Uranus stationing retrograde on Monday, and if you guys know me, you know I don't really care too much about outer planet stations, but I do have I have a soft spot in my heart for Uranus because I love Uranus, and it's all about innovation. It's all about breaking through, and I think with Uranus stationing retrograde this week, I think this is kind of like I can't think of the analogy I want to right now, but it's it's kind of like the trick up our sleeve. This is kind of like the one thing that might actually help us get a little bit loose, get a little bit more comfortable. But then also with this week's highlights, we have Venus conjoining the Sun and going Cazimi, which is going to be quite refreshing for that day, as well as the full moon in Aquarius. And I think that this is really bringing, you know, we have the two luminaries being lit up, like we're actually able to see things. We're actually able to hit to the climax of things where things are, you know, illuminated, and we're able to see what's going on. And so I think that this is going to give us a bigger sense of clarity too. And after that full moon in Aquarius, the next day we have Mercury finally leaving shadow. And that's really exciting because this Mercury retrograde was like, you know, the one thing out of this whole June, July, you know, craziness that we had going on that was like really kind of just being a pain in the ass. And so now Mercury's out of shadow. It can finally start moving forward. It can finally start doing new things and having new experiences. But also this week we have Mercury squaring Uranus. And the only reason I brought this up as a highlight is because, you know, I think while Mercury is now in Leo, out of shadow, where it's still a little bit louder, still a little bit more, you know, Mercury's having just a fine time being in the light. While Mercury squares Uranus, I think that this is where we're going to have a little bit more unexpectedness come in, and I think that this is, you know, something to definitely pay attention to later in the week. But as we get into, Sunday, by the time we get into next week, basically, and end this week, we have Mars moving into Virgo, which I really think is going to change a lot of how we're really adapting our energy and what we're really doing. You know, Virgo is a mutable sign. It is about change. This is Mars. This is doing something. This is Virgo. We're talking about, you know, specifics. We're talking about details. And so I know I just kind of basically almost covered the week in like 3 minutes. However, that's the highlights this week. And so we should probably get started talking about it. So let's just jump into the horoscope. So as we start today off on August 12th, that is when we're having Uranus stationing retrograde. And like I said earlier, I don't think that this is, you know, with everything else going on, this is honestly not that big of a deal. But while Uranus is in Taurus and it's kind of like... Hold on. All right, where was I? So while Uranus is in Taurus, it's kind of like, you know, Uranus, that innovation, breakthrough, freedom, liberation, you know, going against the flow, going against the grain of things. And while it's in Taurus, this is kind of like, you know, where we feel security, where we feel value, where we want to be, you know, grounded and comfortable. Uranus stationing retrograde, I feel like, is kind of like giving us that excuse to be okay with not being comfortable and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that that's going to kind of give us this little spark that's going to help us when it comes to, you know, Venus going Cazimi this week, this full moon in Aquarius. I think it's just going to kind of give us less restrictions when it comes to what we experience with this stuff. But also on Monday, that's when we're having the moon conjoining Saturn and the South Node and that Pluto mess. And so I really do think that starting Monday off is kind of like, you know, on a serious note, it's Moon in Capricorn conjoining Saturn. This is basically, where do we have to define things? Where do we need to set some, boundaries? Where do we need to understand where we're feeling limited, where we're feeling constrained? But also the Moon conjoining Saturn, I say this almost every single time the Moon's in Capricorn, it's a good time to just detach and get some work done, especially if you're trying to, it was a slow June and July, so if you've, got stuff to catch up on, this is a good time to start working on things. But I think the Moon conjoining Saturn, South Node, Pluto, while we start Monday is just giving us not a daunting feeling, but more of like, this is a serious deal. Like, sometimes it can be easy to get caught up in life and be like, oh, maybe I should not make it that serious. Maybe it shouldn't be that important. But, everything you do is pretty serious. All of your intentions that you have, the words that you speak, who you influence, and what how you react and respond. And so on Monday, while the Moon's conjoining Saturn right before we go into this full moon phase, I want you guys to really look at where are you, kind of, I don't want to say detaching yourselves from, but what is actually serious in your life right now, and where does that serious need to be addressed with, seriousness, and where do you need to kind of, I said with Uranus stationing retrograde, it's a good time to, like, we won't have so many limitations and restrictions, and I don't want that to be, confused with the Moon conjoining Saturn being about limitations and restrictions. I want that to be focused on where is that limitation and restriction. Is that Uranus stationing retrograde going to help you liberate yourself from that? You got to remember, this is the Moon on the South Node. This is kind of like, this is gunky. This is no bueno. We got to get out of this. But then as we go into Tuesday on August 13th, that is when the Moon is going to enter Aquarius and oppose Mercury. And so while the Moon's going into Aquarius, it's starting to begin this full moon phase. This is the sign of Aquarius. It's a Saturn-ruled sign where we are still talking about, rules, discipline, authority, all that Saturn stuff that we love. But Aquarius is an air sign. This is more about the idea of, not necessarily so much the physical, tangible thing of. This is like, what ideas, what social contracts, what connections, what ideas are we basing our structures off of? Because those ideas are going to be how we build actual physical structures. And so while the Moon goes into Aquarius, it's kind of like opening up the thought of like, hey, if I'm going to define things, how I build things is going to be how I define things. How am I defining them? And as the Moon is opposing Mercury and Leo, this is kind of like Mercury and Leo here wanting to be like, hey, I want it to look this grand way. It's still in shadow. It's still trying to go over what it was trying to do earlier. But as the Moon's in Aquarius, I take this time to really look at other options. This is the Moon, and it's almost its full phase, so there's light to be seen here. But as it opposes Mercury, it may be a little bit difficult to like let your ego see things like that. It can be easy to be like, I want to see things this way. But I can just recommend on Tuesday, try to be more open about how things can look. And then as we go into Wednesday on August 14th, that is when we have Venus conjoining the Sun and going Cazimi, and it's kind of a weird time with this full moon in Aquarius because, the full moon in Aquarius is also happening on Wednesday. But, as Venus is conjoining the Sun here, where it's getting purified and it's, being brought into the light, this is Venus where we're talking about value. We are talking about, love, relationships. We're talking about connection. We're talking about what we enjoy, what we're passionate about while it is in the sign of Leo. And, this is the sign of Leo. This is like, attention. This is validation. This is bringing light to things. This is understanding. This is being authentic. And while it is conjoining the Sun, while it is in Leo, I think that this is just a really good time to kind of, in essence, pat yourself on the back, but give yourself some admiration. Where do you want to have more value, receive more value in your life? Because you'll receive more from other people if you start giving to yourself more and giving to other people more. And I really think that that's what this Venus and Leo is about giving and about putting that into the light. And that giving comes like, being your most authentic self, whatever it is that you're giving, whether it's your attention, your love, your time, your, money, whatever it is. You giving, you being yourself and helping others, putting other people into the light is going to bring that more to you. And so while Venus is conjoining the Sun, even if you're not in the mood to give right now and you still just, you want to do things your way, I think that this is just a time to really acknowledge, where do you value yourself and where can you give yourself more, even if that looks like more time doing the things that you enjoy or just patting yourself on the back. But then we also have the full moon in Aquarius going on Wednesday. And like I said before, this is bringing light to stuff. And this is basically like exactly opposite Venus. And so this is kind of like, where do we need to connect ourselves to a bigger picture? And like I said earlier, the definitions that we use to define our ideas are going to be the same definitions that we use to build our structures and how we implement that. And so while this full moon in Aquarius is happening, I want you guys to go outside the box and maybe redefine what certain things mean for you. What certain things, it's easy to stay on on one belief or have one belief about something, and it's hard to change those things. But I want you guys to look at how can you redefine it, how can you restructure the way that you think, the way that things connect, the way that, things make sense and that they work, and keep the idea of, let's have some structure, let's have some discipline, let's have some, some realism to this. However, this is a Venus conjoining the Sun in Leo. We can be optimistic. We can have bigger, grander dreams. We can feel, we can be just excited for, a big, grandiose dream as we can a small, simple reality. And I think that that's what Wednesday is really about. And then on Thursday, on August 15th, we're going to be having the moon opposing Mars. And I think that while the moon is still full, still bringing some light, still bringing some ideas, opposing Mars, it's kind of like I said before with it opposing Mercury, it's going to kind of hurt our egos a little bit. But if we let ourselves become more open-minded, it'll be a little bit easier. While the moon's opposing Mars, this is kind of like, now we kind of have to take away that ego part when it comes to changing and actually taking action on things and actually implementing the change that you want to see. It's hard to make different decisions, and it's hard to get out of your own way sometimes. But while the moon's in Aquarius opposing Mars, I think this is a really good time to be like, hey, look, how can you do things differently even if it bruises your ego? But then also on Thursday, Mercury finally leaves shadow. And like I said before, this is Mercury treading new territory. This is Mercury finally getting to go through the process of Leo all the way, where it gets to define more of what meaning is, and gets to say and speak more what is from the heart, and say what is more authentic, and say it loudly and say it proudly. However, while Mercury is leaving shadow and going into these new places of Leo, I wanted to hit back on, getting out of our own way, stepping out of our ego. Let Mercury and Leo take charge in the sense of writing something new. You don't have to be hard on yourself. Like I said before, it's easy to bruise our egos, and we can be sensitive to those things. But while Mercury's going through Leo, rewrite that ego. Make something more authentic. Make something that's more definitive for you, something that makes more sense for you, and something that's going to empower you in a more, I keep saying the word authentic because it's a fucking great word, but authentically. And then later Thursday night is when the moon will actually enter Pisces, where this gives us an opportunity, a chance to kind of like be with ourselves, be with our thoughts, and be with our feelings, and kind of blend them into the big pot to kind of see what comes out on the other end. However, as we jump into Friday on August, 16th, that is when we're going to have Mercury squaring Uranus. And now, as Uranus is retrograde, kind of giving us a little bit more edge and giving us a little bit more, there's a little bit more fire in the way that we speak while Mercury is squaring it. But during that Mercury square Uranus, there's a kind of a couple sides to this. One is like, you may have some revelation, some type of, not like a break, I say revelation as if like a breakthrough day, like saying something you've never said before, or, taking charge on a new idea, or communicating ways that you've never done before that's more, better for you, something that feels more, that you can feel more confident in speaking in, something that you feel more, passionate about. But while Mercury squaring Uranus, you may have that breakthrough, that type of revelation. However, Mercury squaring Uranus is also kind of like, don't just jump into the water, take a couple steps first to see what the temperature's like and to see if you even want to go swimming. Like, it's kind of like, it's going to be easy to be sensitive with how we speak and how other people receive our communication. But while Mercury squaring Uranus, this is kind of like, how can we be creative and how can we be innovative about speaking what we're passionate about and speaking what's on our hearts without necessarily rocking the boat. Which at this point, I feel like with this Mercury retrograde in Leo, we should have already figured this out by now. Then as we get into this weekend on Saturday, on August 17th, that is when we're going to have the moon conjoining Neptune and squaring Jupiter. And after we just had Jupiter stationing direct and this full moon and Mercury leaving shadow, Venus conjoining the Sun, Uranus station retrograde, we just had so much. I'm sorry, I had to make sure I went through everything. But there was a lot that we already had happen by the time we get to Saturday. But while the moon's conjoining Neptune, there's a bigger picture to this involved. There's something deeper a little bit about it. We get a little bit more, existential, a little bit more dreamy, a little bit more spiritual with it. But I think what's interesting is while the moon's conjoining Neptune, it's in that Jupiter-Neptune square, and the moon's going to be squaring Jupiter, and I think that this is kind of a time to, when we're mixing the pot of our thoughts and our feelings, trying to change it or transform it into, something else, that square to Jupiter now with Jupiter being direct is kind of like, you don't have to get lost and confused with everything. Like, you can feel, process your feelings, know what you're going through, but as it's squaring Jupiter, Jupiter's not direct. Like, you understand that there's a bigger picture here involved in that. There's a journey that is about to leave, and you got to make sure that you're going on that journey with Jupiter. Journey with Jupiter. But, don't leave yourself behind because you're not sure. Don't, stay stagnant or unclear because you don't have all the answers, because you're never going to have all the answers. And it's kind of like, who do you trust right now? Neptune and Pisces or Jupiter and Sagittarius? Then as we go into Sunday on August 18th, that is when we're going to have the moon going into Aries. And this is important because every time the moon goes into Aries, I swear to God, it's so like, it's the same way with the moon in Capricorn. You can just detach and, not have your feelings involved. Well, the moon's in Aries, it's like, we got to do something. We're charged up. We're feeling, we can emotionally invest ourselves into our actions. And even though that comes with consequences of being a little bit more angry, a little bit more, head on with things, it's good for, motivating yourself and doing something. And while the moon goes into Aries, we also have Mars going into Virgo, where this is about executing. This is about changing things up. This is a mutable sign. This is about change. This is about doing something different. The sign of Virgo goes from summer to fall. Have we stashed all of our acorns? And if not, Mars in Virgo is kind of like, we need to get all the acorns so we can go through winter. Mars in Virgo is kind of like, where do we need to actually decisively and specifically put ourselves into, or what actions do we need to specifically take in order to at least try to get to the place that we're trying to get to. And so while Mars goes into Virgo, this is going to be a really good time to focus, have attention to detail. But while Mars is in Virgo, don't get hung up on the details. For God's sakes, it doesn't have to look a certain way, as long as you can have your bare basics on your to-do list or on what you need list, that's fine. Don't get caught up in the details. Don't get overwhelmed and have analysis paralysis. This is the time of making it simple, making it easy to understand. And, it's kind of like the difference between Gemini and Virgo. Gemini is kind of like just getting the message across, while Virgo is like, when they write law and they use specific words for a specific sentence, that's like Virgo. Like, be a little bit more specific, but also when it comes to law, there's a lot of umbrella terms that can kind of mean a lot of things. So don't get hung up on the specifics, but be, specific enough to where there's a definition at least. And then as we get into next week on Monday, by the time we are here again at this video, God, it's been a long video so far. We have the moon shining Mercury and Jupiter, and honestly, next week just really looks like a nice charge up. Like the moon's in Aries, we have shining Mercury, Mercury's gonna start shining Jupiter, Jupiter's shining the moon, there's this big grand trine going on, and it's like, it's the moon, it's this personal planet with Mercury being our mindset, so it's like our emotions and our mindset and the way that we think can actually start to have some harmony here, but it's also trining Jupiter, where it's, now direct, and it's making things bigger and funner and bolder. And I think that's just how we start next week. But then, by the time we get to next week's highlights, we have Venus going into Virgo, the Sun going into Virgo, we have Mercury trining Jupiter, and we have Venus conjoining Mars. There is so much stuff going on next week, and like I said, I said this in my August horoscopes, I said this in the past couple weekly horoscopes, like, last week was crazy, this week's crazier, it just keeps moving forward from here, kinda in a sense, but this week and next week are like the 2 weeks where shit starts changing, shit starts popping off, basically. And that's basically what I got for you guys. So with that being said, thank you guys again so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.